get started and work through if anybody comes in, but I'm going to be mindful of everybody's time. So tonight we're going to talk a little more about, go a little more detail about the city's finances. Terry Langwell, our finance director, is supposed to be here to talk to y'all some tonight, but she's actually on a deployment with the Incident Support Task Force down with some of the tornadoes down south. Weren't able to make it last week. I'm Garrett Spradlin. I'm the city manager for the city of Borger, for better or worse, or what I normally joke is depending on who you are and what you want. But tonight we'll talk, like I said, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the finances. We hit a little bit of that last week, but tonight we're going to talk about how we handle all that stuff and where we get it. So this is our financial team. Terry Langwell is our director of finance. Chrissy Earls is our assistant director of finance, and Sarah Parra is our financial specialist. So they handle all the financing and accounting, payables, all that for about $41 million a year. As we get into it, you'll kind of see how that goes. But most cities work in what we call fund accounting. The best way to talk about fund accounting is we have one bank account, but not all the money is usable for anything. So we divide all our money up into different buckets, and not all buckets get filled the same way, and not all buckets have the same rules, and you can't always move money from one bucket to another bucket. Sometimes that can be really hard when we're talking to citizens because they see a $41 million budget and think that we've got $41 million. Well, we have $41 million, but it may or may not be able to fund what they want it to fund. So our funds are classified into two different types, major funds and non-major funds. So major funds are like the big business. They handle large amounts of money and expenses with a more diverse purpose. So this is McDonald's, it's really big. And they've got multiple restaurants and they handle all sorts of things for all of that stuff. So for us, this is like the general fund, which is our biggest fund, which is police, fire, public safety, public works, all of that stuff. We'll go into more detail of that in a minute. And then we've got a lot of non-major funds, which are like small businesses. They deal with less money and are more specialized. So instead of the big national chain, this is your little food truck, that's only worrying about his little food truck and his specific costs. So he doesn't care what the other food truck is doing because it's not related to him. Where McDonald's is caring about what every store does and what all the employees do. And so that's kind of how they get broken up, or one way to think about that. So then those are the types of fund, or the categories of funds, but then we have a couple of types. So we have restricted funds, which are restricted for a specific condition on how they can be used. So for us, and we'll go into more detail on some of these, this is like the Tourism Fund, Parks and Rec Fund, Youth Advisory Council, Opioid Project Fund, TIF Fund, and Transportation User Fund. Some of these, like the Court Technology Fund, like if you pay a citation, you might see a little fee down there that says like court technology fee. That goes into a restricted fund that can only be used on court technology upgrades. And the Court Security Fund fee can only be used for court security expenses. I can't use it for anything else. So it doesn't matter how much money I got in there. If you want to pave your street with it, you can't because it's illegal. Then we have unrestricted funds, which are generally our operating funds. So for us, this is the General Fund and Water Sewer Fund. It's more flexibility. They're not necessarily restricted to what it is. So there are some decisions to be made there. So the money that comes into the general fund, the council can allocate between whatever programs they want, depending on what the priorities are. Governmental funds is another category. So the general fund is an unrestricted governmental fund because these pay for services that run like a government, right? So we talked a little bit last time. We don't make profit, right? The job of a government is not to make profit. So our accounting and how we do things is completely different than a for-profit business because we don't have cost of goods, we don't have advertising. I mean, we have advertising expenses, but not like that offset our costs. So, we don't have like a gross profit and then a net profit, and that's how you determine whether or not we're doing well. We don't do that. Those are governmental funds. But we do have some funds that we call proprietary funds that are run like a business. So for us, this is like the Water Sewer Fund. We do sell a product in water sewer, right? We're selling water and then we're providing a service. So we can run and operate our water and sewer system much more like a private business because you're set up more like that, and you handle assets and cost of goods and things like that like you do on the private side. But on the government side, there's not really, every time you call the police, we're not going to send you a bill and make you pay for the police service, right? So that's just kind of worked in there. So those are kind of the main types of funds. These are our current fund structures, and this kind of isn't everything. So we've got unrestricted funds, our general fund and our water sewer fund. Then restricted funds, these are just a few. I've got a big list in the minute, but these are the ones we're going to talk about kind of tonight a little more in depth so that you can kind of see what resources we have. And so kind of the first unique fund is our tourism fund. And so tourism, the revenue from this comes from hotel occupancy tax. So, if you ever stay at a hotel room and then you see that local hot tax on your bill, most cities in Texas have it. That money goes into our tourism fund. Because it's generated from hotel stays and the hotels and the hotel industry supports it, it is restricted to tourism-related projects that have the potential of increasing heads and beds. And so when we talk about what we want to spend money on, that's that Texas 2-step down there, is there's 2 components to whether or not we can spend tourism funds on it. Step 1 is, does it have a potential of putting heads and beds? You don't have to prove that it did, but could it? So could it generate additional hotel stays? And then, so in addition to possibly making hotel stays, then it has to be in one of the 7 approved categories. For us, we only have 5 that we can spend on it. The other 2 are like things that we're either not in that population bracket that specific item was in, because like some of them, like if you're in a city, the state likes to carve out things by saying if you're in a city over 1 million but under 2 million, and in a county with less than 5 million but more than 3 million, then you can do this. And so there's a couple of those other things are restricted to things that Borger doesn't fall into. We can use that money if it has a potential of putting heads in beds for the registration of convention delegates, advertising, solicitation, and promoting that directly promotes tourism and the hotel and convention industry. So this is somewhere where we used to kind of get off because people they'd want us to pay for advertising in like the Borger News Herald. But is advertising in the Borger News Herald going to put heads and beds? Because if you're seeing it in the local newspaper, you probably already live here, so you're not going to come in. So when we give tourism funds, we want that to go to like regional advertising to try to attract people into the community with the potential of staying in a hotel. So that's a lot of times the thing that can impact with that. Promotion of the arts that directly promotes tourism and the hotel and convention industry. So like we will use money on this to like cover the artists for like Boomtoberfest. Because if you bring in a big concert, you think there's likelihood that somebody's going to come in, and we pay for a hotel for the artists to stay in. So right there's already 1 hotel room, but you got the potential for other hotels to come in. The problem where we run into people wanting to use money for some of this is if it's not open to the public. If the event isn't open to the public, how's it going to impact the tourism industry of the community? Some people have recently been a little upset with some of the rule changes that we've enforcing it more. Is like a lot of times high school reunions used to get a lot of this money, but high school reunions put heads in beds. They don't meet the next step. It's not, advertising isn't going to help because there's it's not open to the public. So, other than who's in the class is not going to come. It's not an art. You're not hiring an artist. And music is just one type of art, but it can be performing arts. So like, we've given money to like the Boomtown Theater, and we give money to Tri-City Concert Association out of this. Historic preservation, we give money to the Friends of the Museum to support some of their operations. So like for them, that pays for their big cowboy poetry event they have at the Dome every year, which brings in some people. Then sporting events. Now the deal with the sporting events is that you have to have more 50% plus 1 attendee has to be not from the county. So if you're going to use this as sporting events, you've got to have more of the teams from somewhere else. So the Borger Youth Sports Initiative, their Boomtown basketball tournament every year, gets some money out of this to help support it because more than half of their teams are from outside of the community. And so they come in and might stay in a hotel and visit the local businesses. Part of this also is what's paying for the debt for the Dome. So because that's under the convention, it can support convention centers and tourism information centers. And so that's why when we did the Dome, we passed a venue tax, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is another 2% hot tax, and then this. So about 90% of our debt payment to redo the Dome is paid for by tourism funds, which are not paid really by anybody in the community. They're paid by people that come and stay in our hotels. And so that's how we got to do that big Dome project without increasing the tax rate. And you'll see what our tax rate's actually done in the last little bit. And we're in a pretty good, we're really lucky for that, because compared to other cities our size, because with our industry and stuff, we have a pretty high hotel occupancy. People that just come in to support the refinery, or sales people that come in to sell to the refinery, and then of course during turnarounds you get a lot of that. But our hotel occupancy tax is about twice the size of Pampa's or Dumas. Pampa gets a little more because even when the turnarounds come in, they can't all stay here, so a lot of them end up in Pampa. But we do pretty well with that. It's about $400,000 a year is what comes in with that. We give $75,000 to the chamber to administer a tourism program, so they do tourism related grants. So if you've got a tourism type event that could put heads in the bed and meet one of those 5 categories, they open that up every February for grant support through the tourism funds to support those projects. You can reach out to the chamber. They've got an application. I think it's on our website as well too. So that's one, and this is one too where when we spend some money on this, we're like, well, by God, I can't believe they wasted money on that. We got big potholes that need streets repaired. They're wasting money. Well, I don't see anywhere on this does it say transportation systems that allow tourists to get from venue to venue. And so that is not one of the things. So this, I can't use this money to pay infrastructure debt or street debt debt or improve parks or any of that. And that's sporting events. It's not sports fields. So I can't put this money in improving sports fields or paying for debt for sports fields. It's just sporting events, because remember, this is tied to hotel occupancy. So we've got to try, it's got to be something that has a chance of bringing heads and beds, and one of those limited reasons. So we also have a park special project fund. So this is, if you notice on your water bill, if you actually pay the $1 voluntary donation, says parks on there, it goes into this fee, and it can only be used to support park projects. So for us, it's about $30,000 a year is what we get out of that little voluntary fee. You can see here lately, it's replaced the play equipment in Keeler Park. It added the new play equipment in Buena Vista Park. We added a climber in Santa Fe Park and Cofield Park and Agnes Howell Park. And then it supported the dog park. $30,000 anymore isn't a whole lot. Back when they started this, it was making almost $50,000 a year. And in that time, as the community has declined, it's making less money. But at the same time, all the stuff is costing more. A small playground area with the pour and play stuff is $100,000, $100,000 to $130,000. If I'm going to use this for it, that's 6 years I've got to save up to get that up. We've talked about, and the council might at some point, we might allow that money to be flexible so that the utility person could maybe, or the customer could decide, they want $1, $2, $5, something like that to try to make it. Because we talked about this a little bit last time. Our population since 1960 has steadily declined from about 20,000 to 12,005. We had 28 parks in 1960. We still have 28 parks, but we've got half the population to pay and support the cost of maintaining those parks. So I think what you're going to start seeing, and what our parks plan did, is trying to probably repurpose some parks and get people in the mindset that not every park has to have play equipment. And you can have open space parks, you can have community garden parks, you can have reflection parks. We're going to try to start pushing some of that stuff out and get people used to maybe having not play equipment in every park, because at $100,000 a park, 28 parks, that's $3 million to replace all of the park equipment and put new park equipment in every single park. And that's just like the little things that are at Keeler or Buena Vista Park. The new play equipment at Huber Park, that's what you see back behind there. The picture was the diagram of it. That was $400,000 to do all of that. And parks is also one of the kind of the hard things for, we talked last time that, cities were formed for the common good. And we as the city have to look at the city as a whole, to where a resident is probably only concerned with the one park that's closest to them or the one that they like the best. But they don't understand that I've got to prioritize and take care of 28 parks and spread the money around and not just focus on one park. It was really funny because we used to get a lot of complaints that, well, all you ever do is spend money in Huber Park. So we started, putting money in some of the other parks, and they redid North Hughes, which is now called Skittles, and we put into Keeler and Buena Vista, and everybody's mentioning, well, y'all don't ever do anything in Huber Park. So now we went back to Huber Park, and now they're back, well, you don't. What about all the other parks? And so we just kind of have to mind, there's a balance in everything we want to do. People only want to pay so much in taxes, and they only want to pay so much in fees, and that only goes so far. So we have to balance it. But if you look citywide, I think we've made a lot of progress, and we are making some sort of investment in some sort of park or recreation activity every year. It might not be the one you want, but we've been going through it. Last year, it took a lot of money, but we saved up and we're able to do that. We'll talk about that in a minute with some reserve funds, but we redid the swimming pool. And the swimming pool, the problem with Johnson Park is everybody's like, well, I can't believe you just redid it. Well, we redid it back in 2006. And I think people forget that was now 20 years ago. And actually in 2006, we didn't touch the pool. We built the gym and redid all the internal facilities and added a kiddie pool. But the main pool, all the plumbing and the plaster and all of that wasn't touched. They added the slides, but they didn't touch the pool. That pool was the same pool and the same mechanics and the same plumbing since 1957 when it first went in. And so when it came to dealing with Johnson Park, it wasn't a matter of should this money go into a pool? It was, do we have a pool or do we not have a community pool? And so that's kind of why it got higher priority. It's not, do we improve this over something else? But we've done quite a bit. We did do the skate park's got new skate equipment that went in about 6 months ago. If you haven't been up there, I've seen it used a lot. So we're making pretty steady progress, but there are limitations to everything we can do. The venue project fund, we mentioned that a little bit with tourism. It is from hotel occupancy tax. It's an extra 2% on your hotel room, and it is restricted for the use and support of the designated venue. So for us, the designated venue is the Dome. And so the Dome was a $10 million project. We issued $7.5 million that's paid for out of the HOT tax. And we made the gap up with another $2 million that this pays for. And so this will be in place as long as the Dome is there. It'll probably stay in place because once you pay off the debt, then the venue goes away unless you issue more debt. Well, in 25 years, we're going to probably need to issue more debt to do some improvements because if we haven't, we will definitely need to replace carpet by then and probably repaint and do some things. Heating and air units will need some replaced. But so the money in the venue is restricted to the venue. Right now, it funds one employee out there, and it funds the operation of it, and it funds the debt payment for that. The other kind of unique one we have is we have a tax increment fund. And so a tax increment fund is a way of capturing increases in property tax and then reallocating that increase into the specific zone that is established. And so this is our TIRZ number 1, the central corridor. So everything in yellow is in that zone. And so mainly this zone was created to deal with downtown revitalization, housing, and kind of that central corridor. The way it kind of works is so when you establish the TIRZ, the tax increment reinvestment zone, you freeze that current tax value. So the value of everything in that zone is set, you set the base. And that base value keeps getting paid to the taxing entities that are paying into it just like it was in that year. But then every year going forward, if the appraisals go up, the value, the tax generated on that increment then gets paid back into the TIRZ, into our TIF fund. So as the value of that area goes up, we then get that money to reinvest in things back into that zone. And so for us, this is, if you've watched the council, the TIRZ board and the council just approved a downtown momentum grant, which is built to help downtown buildings with like roofs and building improvements, to keep them viable. And so we're using some of that money into those things. There was a news story, you might have seen that on Channel 7 yesterday, kind of talking about what we're kind of trying to maybe scheme on the old hotel. So a TIRZ of value, that allows us to give an incentive. Say somebody comes in and wants to do something with that, the TIRZ can give them what property tax they would pay on, because right now, the hotel's $74,000 on the tax roll, right? So if they come in and redo it, it's going to be, probably $20 million on the tax roll. And so the tax on the difference between $20 million and $74,000 will go into the TIRZ, which we can then rebate back to them to offset some of their renovation costs for a period of time. And I think, there are a lot of different theories or people believe differently, but I think most people in this community would think giving them back because if we don't give somebody something to do something with it, it's going to keep sitting like it is and be a big public health hazard. And so foregoing some future property tax to get something done with that is worth a little bit of money, because if it keeps going, at some point we're going to have to tear it down like we did the old Phillips building. The old Phillips building on South Main, that cost us $300,000 to tear down. I don't even want to guess what that would cost. We're going to be stuck with something, but this is a way to maybe help incentivize that. And then as the district, as it grows, we get all that. Now, the nice thing is it's offset. So it doesn't impact any of the city's operating costs or the counties, because that value comes out of your appraised value. So your tax rate isn't calculated on that value. And for schools, the state picks up that cost in your funding formula. So every dollar that the school puts into it is actually coming out of the state money, because the school's always the highest tax rate generally in a community. So that's a lot of money that we can take and put into this, and it really not impact the school at all, because the state will just add it to their funding formula, so they're not out any of that money. Now, in theory, it is still the property tax, and so somebody's paying it, but then we get to put it back into the zone. If we improve the zone, everybody's property values in the zone will eventually go up. And the main concept behind it is at the end of the 30 years, you hope that the value of the zone is worth more than what it would have been if you hadn't reinvested in it, right? So if we just let everything go, like ours started at $55 million. This year, I think the value in it was, we have we've gone up about, I think, $20 million. So it's like right around $80 million, $70-some million in it. But if we don't and if you get the hotel done, now that's $20 million, and we've got some new houses that we've been able to fund going into Yucca Estates that we kind of talked about last week. The thinking is if you didn't do the TIRZ, in 30 years, the value would have gone from 55 to, let's just say, $100 million. But if you reinvest and increase resources in the zone at the end of 30 years, it's 150 instead of the 100 it would have been. So at the end of the 30 years, all the taxing entities that participate in it actually are generating more tax once that all comes back to their operating tax than what would have been if you hadn't invested back into the zone. And so we can use this on right now, like in our zone, both the county, the school district, and the city participate at 100%. So when we're talking about doing with these things, we get to leverage some pretty good money, and we can use those incentives on infrastructure, streetscapes, facade improvements, landscaping, redevelopment incentives, public improvements, hazard mitigation, like clearing up asbestos and things like that. A TIRZ takes time. So we started the TIRZ in 2018. In 2026, 8 years later, we find it's got about $480,000 in the bank right now. So it's kind of taken, 8 years to get where you've got some money to do some things, but it's also generating about $140,000 a year now. So that's enough for probably some incentive or some building downtown. And the thinking is with like our downtown momentum grant is we're improving permanent building improvements. So like if we help one of the downtown merchants with a roof, that improves that building regardless of who owns it from now on, right? So we're not necessarily giving that, we're helping an individual, but it's really there to help the building and then help the building for the long term. Everything that grant will fund are building like code compliance issues, like so putting in ADA bathrooms or adding fire suppression or fire alarms, abating asbestos, roof, new doors and windows, facade improvements that improve the physical building. Because if we don't, like roofs right now, we get a lot of feedback from our downtown merchants that's one of the biggest problems. Several of them can't get insured because they don't have a good roof and they can't afford to get a good roof. And water can do all sorts of weird damage, and it can be really bad. So that's kind of probably what we're going to see focusing on going forward, because even vacant buildings, if we don't get a good roof on them, they're going to continue to deteriorate to where it can't be used. And so we're excited to see now that we've got some money and some more things happening. So I think we'll get to see some improvements with downtown, and we're putting in a whole lot of pieces of the puzzle together. And we've got a whole session later in a couple of weeks on, when we get to public engagement and all of that'll talk about some of the things we're doing with the TIRZ. But that money can only be spent in the zone. We got to be careful about that. The other restricted money we have now is the Transportation User Fund. So you might, this is on your water bill too. I think it's like abbreviated TRANS, but this goes into a fund that is restricted for street improvements. And so when we implemented the transportation user fee, we moved all of our street maintenance into the TUF. And so the way the TUF works is that each building or each business is assigned a trip factor from the Association of like Transportation Engineers, or whatever the Transportation Engineers official association is. So they figured out the impact that certain businesses by type have on the road system. And so it's a more fair way to pay for the road system because we're actually charging based on your use of it. So like a homeowner pays a flat $6 a month, Walmart pays $650 a month. Because when you factor in their trip factor over their square footage, they're getting more benefit and causing more damage to the street system than the two-person home is, right? And so there's a classification for all those types of businesses. You've got retail, then a doctor's office has got a different one because they've got different traffic, but they still pay more than like just an office building, because an office building, the workers probably come to work and then they stay and then they leave at work, but a doctor's got people coming there's all this stuff that goes into what that trip factor is. So for us, when we moved it into the TUF, we were able to reduce the property tax rate by 3 cents. So we reduced the property rate, then added the fee to the bill. So it was about an even wash. Instead of $150,000 a year for street maintenance, we're now able to fund about $450,000 a year for street maintenance, which is why in the last 3 years, you've probably seen a whole lot more of that happen. So some of this is paying for the debt that we issued to redo 10th Street. So the TUF paid for that debt to help redo 10th Street. When we did the street assessment, 10th Street was rated the worst with the highest amount of traffic count. And if you remember the old 10th Street, it wasn't just pavement failing. It had base failure in some places because, all the truck traffic. And the funny thing about 10th Street is it wasn't always a state highway. So it was just a city street at some point back before Cedar Street was built. Because keep in mind, in the Cedar Street, Highway 136, Cedar Street, wasn't put in until the late 50s, when the Cloverleaf and all of that was put in. Prior to that, Main Street was the state highway. And so when everybody talks about all the traffic on Main Street, in the good old days, well, some of that was because everybody that went through town had to drive through Main Street, and then they built the highway, and, it kind of bypassed all of that, and you see that in other cities. When they did that, they designated 10th Street as a state highway, but only for signage, because they needed to put signs on it to help direct people to where the new state highway was. So it was a state highway, but we were responsible for the maintenance, except for the sign. And so when we did that project, we worked with TxDOT, and we agreed, because now it doesn't make sense to be a state highway, right? Why does 10th need to be a state highway? I know some people have some feedback, but for the most part, the design and the layout, I think, is improved. We've improved parking, and it looks a lot better. But if we hadn't worked out the deal with TxDOT to take it off of the state highway system, state highway standards require parallel parking. So if you think you don't like the parking like we put in, that was a compromise with TxDOT to get angled parking versus parallel parking, because if we had kept it on the state system, we would have had to do parallel parking. So we agreed to take it off the state system. In exchange for that, they also gave us $1 million to offset the $6 million we spent on it. And so now it's about to be, it hasn't completely come off the state system. They're doing the final process of that, but it will just be a local road. But because it wasn't ever built as a highway, it wasn't ever built to state standards. And so then you just got all that traffic on it, which is why it was the hardest part. What we do is we use that street assessment to kind of rate how we win and what we do with streets, because some streets, they might need to be rebuilt, but they might not have the traffic count to really warrant it. So we got to be careful on what we do. I mean, if you've got a dead-end residential street that's got 4 cars on it a day or less, there are those decisions to be made. 10th Street is the busiest street of city maintenance responsibility. So of all the streets in town that the city is responsible for, 10th Street had the highest traffic count, which is why it got prioritized first. Now, when we talk about streets, and we'll talk more, you'll get maps and stuff when we get into public works, but keep in mind, most of your main streets are state highways, and the state's responsible for, not us. Cedar Street, Carolina Street, 3rd Street, Fairlanes or 1551, Florida, those are all state highways. So the city doesn't maintain those, the state does. And so a lot of times when we get gripes and feedback on the streets are so bad, they're not the city streets, they're the state highways. Most of the residential is city, but the main highways are not. Yeah, so 1551, the one that goes from from stoplight to stop, or from stoplight to flashing light, is state. And the state merits are like, the only reason we've got the one at Wilson and Roosevelt, the other one that just went up, is because we paid for part of that. And Walmart paid for part of the infrastructure back when Walmart first opened, before they put the light in. But it took 8 years for them to get enough crash data and traffic data to meet their merits to put in a stoplight. So the other side, because like TxDOT, they look at traffic in both directions, because they don't want to stop highway flow if the traffic doesn't warrant stopping traffic flow. So this little map is showing the streets that we're gonna touch this year with our Seal Coat program, or our street maintenance program with the Tough. Got a little money left over from 10th Street, so we're really expanding it this year. So the yellow is chip seal. So I know that's not maybe everybody's favorite. That's where we put down the liquid oil and then put the coated rock on top of that. But the chip seal is $3.16 per square yard. Yeah, so like I kind of got it in. Yeah, so the bottom right group is Fairlanes 2, so that's Wilshire and Willowick and all of that. That up there, up there is like Oak and Pecan and Fillview and those that we haven't done yet. And then that is Loma Linda, Lakeview, and on up there. So this will get everything in Buena Vista done except like Buena Vista, which will be next year, like Butadino and Caliche and all of that will be next year. And then over here is Bulldog Boulevard and St. John's Road, and then Opal, and then over here is 6th Street.
We live on Skycrest, and it was wonderful when you did that.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, and really the coated rock works a lot better than back when we were just using the regular non-coated rock, because when you coat the rock in asphalt, it binds to the liquid asphalt better, so you get less loose rock. I mean, you still get some loose rock, but it's not near as bad. Now, what you're seeing in red, or what's really kind of orange on this screen, that is our microsurfacing projects. So microsurfacing, that's what we did on Roosevelt last year, and then we did it on Wilson Street a little bit. So it's a finer product that gets blended with some emulsion and some concrete to make a smoother finish, but it's $5.40 a cubic yard. So seal coating $3.19 a cubic yard, microsurfacing $5.80 a cubic yard. And microsurfacing, you have to have enough asphalt on the existing road, because that binder, that emulsion and that concrete has to bind with existing asphalt. So a lot of times, if the road hasn't been chip sealed soon enough, we would have to chip seal and then do the microsurfacing too, so you've got $3.18 plus $5.80, so you've got like $9 a cubic yard to do that. We're still kind of testing this out. I think when people see microsurfacing, they generally would prefer it because it ends up looking more like fresh pavement than the rock,
Right.
and it's drag, and it is drag. They use it like a drag box to do it, so it will smooth out some of the imperfections in the road because it'll build at different heights. To where the chip seal, it helps a little bit, but for the most part, it gets pounded back in. Whatever the road contour was before is what the road contour is going to be. We've been doing this on, trying to hit this on some of our higher traffic streets, like 6th Street from Florida, down by City Hall through downtown and ending over by Borger Bank. That's a pretty high traffic area. Wilson Street that we did last year from the stoplight at Florida to the intersection at Main. You go out there, I know some people were kind of bitching because we didn't do it all the way up to the railroad track. Well, that's because the part that we did it is actually the railroad right away. And so that's the railroad's responsibility. They get all pissy if we get into them, but that's why it stopped right there. But this year we're going to do Main Street from 3rd to 10th. We're going to microsurface all of this and kind of where some of the chip seal started coming off. So we'll get a smooth surface from 3rd all the way up to 10th on Main Street, 6th Street, and then Opal from West Wilson to Roosevelt. So that's kind of the main feeder into the college. And so it's kind of got some bumpy roads. So we're doing that. And then we're also going to microsurface that's Lakeview Street out there. The reason we're microsurfacing Lakeview is because Lakeview is the main stormwater feeder for that whole section of Broadmoor and Loma Linda and all that stuff. So it all goes down Broadmoor and then down Lakeview into the pond that's at Lakeview, and then the pond overflows into the creek. So by putting the microsurfacing there, we're going to seal coat it first and then microsurface it, because that way the stormwater won't haul off all the chip and degrade the road as bad.
So it's set right now to go into that pond and drain off.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. This is great. I can
Yeah.
see all that. Okay.
Yeah. And so, but that's why some people, I know some people are going to be, well, you're just doing that. That's all the rich people. That's why you're giving them the fancy street. No, I mean, they are a little nicer homes, but they're getting the fancy street because everybody else's stormwater goes down their fancy road or their road. And so then, like right now, if you go down there, I mean, especially at the cul-de-sac end of that, I mean, you can see where it's just where the stormwater is eating up the road. I mean, it's funny because like a lot of cities, like city managers, their stormwater issues are where do they put it? Like you see that on the news in Amarillo, when they flood and all that stuff and the Playa Lakes overflow. Our problem isn't where to put it. It's the damage the water does going where it's going really fast, because we've got all of the ravines and all of the Canadian river breaks that very few places flood because of the terrain, but because of that goes in a hurry. And water is you see what happens in floods and stuff like that. Water can be very damaging. At the police department, I've seen it pick a dumpster up and move a dumpster 400 feet down the street. So, but we do have a lot of street projects going and having that dedicated. The nice thing with the TUF too is, so yes, we lowered your property tax a little bit, but we added the fee. But this fee, the council can't cannibalize this for anything else. It has to be spent on the transportation system. So now we've got that dedicated funds, and you have seen us greatly. If you've been around long enough, you've seen us really increase the number of streets that we're touching. It's kind of hard to see, but way up there, we're going to do Airport Road and House Road. So that's the side road between by Roma's, and they'll tie into Airport Road back behind there. So that's your main feeder into the airport. That road definitely needs some work. And Roma's they put in a lot of effort into their business. So I think it behooves us to improve what we've got next to kind of a business too. But we are working. I mean, every year we've got a 5-year plan. So every year we're going to hit. We've hit most of the main traffic streets now. So now you're seeing us do it more in like neighborhood areas. So next year we'll probably get all of the rest of Buena Vista, Caliche, all of that stuff, and then we'll probably go over there and hit Isom, like Madison and Monroe and some of that stuff. This is a list, though, of all of the city's different funds. Some of them have more money than others in them, but you can see that, a lot of funds are restricted to a whole bunch of little different things. And so that's like when we talk about our money, yes, we've got $41 million, but $41 million is in a lot of little different things. So we can't just go around and do all that stuff. Talk a little bit about our fund balance and net position. So net position is a financial term used to represent overall value of the government. So this is assets minus liabilities. And so it's kind of like it's like net worth, right? So if you were doing your personal finances, you would have a net worth. For the city, it's net position. And then fund balance is kind of like cash in the bank, right? So we don't use like savings or all of that. We use fund balance to say what's the cash in the bank. We have reserve minimums and everything we'll talk about in a little bit to make sure that we've got enough funds to pay for everything. But those are, next couple slides, you're going to see some terminology about that. So I just kind of want to explain them. Net position, kind of net worth, overall financial health of the the city, fund balance, cash in the bank. So our general fund balance at the start of this year was $4,298,565. So you can see that it's gone up and come down just a little bit. If you notice, it went up in 2020. That was kind of some of our COVID money coming in and all of that stuff. And we were also really short. I mean, we got pretty short staff. So we budget for full staffing every year. And so if you're not full staffing, we have that money. And so over that time, we've spent some of it down. We transferred it out. That's part of what helped do the swimming pool renovation without taking out debt. And then in the water sewer fund, we've got $4,815,785. And you can see its fund balance has kind of come down too, because we've moved money into its capital construction fund. So that's we've paid for a new replacement well 13 with that money. We're in the process of drilling a new well number 24 in the Northwest well field, but we probably can get to use that money for something else, because the Water Development Board's got a new grant out that I think we'll be able to get to pay for that new well. So we'll get to reallocate some of that. But they also moved some of this money to pay for the new swimming pool too without taking out debt. So we did $3.8 million out there without having to take out debt between our fund balance. Now, that's while at the same time we have raised our general fund requirement, our fund balance reserve requirement. So you can see that the general fund requires $4.5 million in reserve, which is 28%. We're a little under that, but the reason we're a little under that is when we added EMS service, when we took over EMS, that added $2 million in operating expenses into our budget that now all of a sudden impacted the reserve requirement. So 28% of $2 million is $500,000. And so we've been slowly adding to that reserve, but we're not up to the 28% now because we we didn't want to like cut other expenditures just to build up a reserve because we added one new expense all at once. So we'll pad it a little bit each year to get us back up to that point. We're still at 20%, 25% reserve balance, which is still good. And in the water fund, you can see we need 3.7 as the reserve requirement. We're at 4.8 there. So we've got the funds in the water sewer to kind of compensate for what little bit of shortcoming we have, but we still have about 3 months of like the general fund could pay for 3 months worth of expenses without any revenue. So that's generally considered pretty good. You don't want your debt rating agencies will actually penalize you for having too much reserves, because then you're either not investing in your capital or you're overtaxing. And so, there's a balance, because, if y'all are paying taxes every year and I'm putting it in the bank and not spending it, are you going to be happy with that? And sometimes that's the kind of what happens sometimes at the county, because they have quite a substantial reserve. But this also allows us to spend throughout the year without having to worry about our cash flow a whole lot, because, like property taxes, you generally receive property taxes in two big lumps. That you get a big chunk in November, because everybody that's got a mortgage and an escrow, all of those companies pay it on October 1 so they can get that little discount. And then you get a big chunk in February, because everybody else, like my grandma, wasn't going to pay it a day early because she wasn't going to let the government make interest on her money. So by God, she paid it January 31st, which was the last day to pay it without any penalty. So that's why you get property tax in two big chunks. Then we get industrial district payments in June. So the reserve allows us to spend and pay for what we need throughout the course of the year without having to worry too much about cash flow. Small cities, cash flow can be a big problem depending on when you get it in. And when I teach budgeting to the CPM program or in my master's program that I'm teaching this year, I tell them just because you've got money in the budget doesn't mean you've got the cash in the bank. And so sometimes smaller cities can get in a real problem. Well, you've got it in the budget, go ahead and spend it. Well, wait, because that budget is based on 12 months worth of revenue. So depending on when that revenue hits, you might have a problem. So there are cities out there that they will take out what is called a tax anticipation note. They will take out debt every year so that they can fund their operations, and then they pay it off when the revenue comes in. If you're small enough and you haven't had opportunities to save money and get a reserve, you might not have a choice. And that's better than our emergency management coordinator worked for the city of Sweetwater for a little while, way back in the days. And he said, there were some times when they'd give them their paycheck on Friday, but be like, please don't put that in the bank till Monday. As a city manager, sometimes, when we try to advocate for professional city managers and things like that, like the problem is a lot of little cities think they can't afford a good city manager. You can't afford a bad one. You don't want to come up with an extra $20,000 or $30,000 to get somebody that's maybe trained and skilled. So you hire that cheap one, and then that cheap one ends up costing you a lot more than that. But we do have pretty good reserves, and we've actually been able to raise that ratio. Like I said, we're a little off right now because it's very uncommon for a city to take over and assume a whole new service that's $2 million a year. This is really, really small, but when you get this, if you want to zoom into it when she emails it back to you, this is our current fund balance of everything. So citywide, what's budgeted at the end of this budget year, we're budgeted to be down to $13 million in cash in the bank. So our reserve requirements are the 5.4 plus the 3.8. So we've got about $8 million of required reserve. The rest of it is what else is in all the other restricted funds. So we got about $13 million in cash that we make interest off of. So that kind of shows you which funds that are in if you want to see it. I know it's small, but this is our net position history. So remember, net position is our net worth or the overall financial status of the city. So we've gone from about $28 million in net position in 2014 to this year we were at just a little over $72 million. So that means our assets are worth $72 million more than all of our liabilities. So when you take the debt out, when you subtract how much we owe in debt, and when you subtract all of that, we still have $72 million left. When it goes up, that means that our financial operations have generally positively impacted the operations, which means we've replaced enough equipment to offset depreciation. So like if all we were doing were paying personnel and weren't putting anything into capital, it's not uncommon for your net position to go down because your assets depreciate a certain amount every year, right? So when it goes up, that means that your cash or your assets have increased greater than they depreciated. So what we've seen is a pretty good rise in that. Now, of course, some of that big jump was, the almost $4 million we got in COVID support over the COVID years, which for us, it stayed up there because we did invest generally in capital assets with that money. We bought land with it that we're planning on using for housing development. That's where some of that came from. We bought the mobile command truck that you're going to see when we get to OEM. We've kind of needed one of those, but COVID, we tried to use things for that we needed that were capital. But if in 20 years we couldn't afford to replace it, it wouldn't be, we could walk away from it if we had to. I tried not to put it on things like we need fire trucks all the time regardless. So we don't want to use one-time income on something that's only going to be used once. That we're going to have to replace because then what if I don't have that money again in 20 years? You're still going to replace it. So we want that built into our revenue stream so that we can make sure that we have money to buy it. And so we did some things like that with the COVID money. At one point, Pampa had a negative net position. They had pretty good money in the bank and they weren't necessarily financially bad, but they deferred investment enough that their loans and everything were more than their cash and the asset value. And so they've corrected that a little bit, but I think last time I looked, their total net position was like $28 million. So just to kind of put that in comparison, of course, we have a really large water system that's valued, that's an asset because we sell to the industry that not everybody else sells to in other cities. So that's some of that. So I want to talk a little bit about our tax rate. And so when you get that tax bill, this is how it breaks up. So, and this is this current year. So the taxes that you just paid, 42% goes to BISD unless you're frozen or now there's a big homestead exemption. So if your home's under $140,000, you don't pay any school tax. But assuming that you pay all of that, 42% is the school district, 25% is the city, 20% is the county, 9% is the college district, and 4% is the hospital district. I like to put this up here and then I ask, and so where do you think your value comes from? And so of all these agencies, how often do you deal with one of them daily? You deal with something the city funds daily because you're driving on one of our streets. If you're living in the city, you're getting water or sewer, you're getting, hopefully you haven't had to call the police, but I guarantee you a police car probably drove by your house at least once. You've got fire and EMS protection. We've got code enforcement if you have a complaint on a neighbor. So we deal, cities deal with our residents generally every day, whether it's indirectly or not. The county, well, a lot of it's courts and jail. They provide, so everybody that we arrest ends up in the county jail. So there is some services with the jail. But like the deputies, generally they can help us. But, since we've got a police department, they're not necessarily here a lot. They handle the district courts, but, unless you're arrested or sued, you may or may not deal with any of the court. I'm not saying that you don't need the county, but you deal with them very selectively. The college district, I think that's good for our community. But there again, unless you're going through college, you're probably not dealing with them on a daily basis. The hospital district, I think that's also somewhat necessary to make sure that we have some medical coverage here, but you may or may not use it. And like I said, the school district's another one of those you need, but if your kids are grown, you eventually grow out of your use of the school district. And I'm not here justifying or not justifying any of their money. I'm just saying out of all of those that you pay taxes to, we're probably the only one that you get some sort of benefit out of every single day. And so this is kind of a comparison of each entity's tax rates over the last 5 years. Well, it's a little old because I haven't updated this because it's kind of hard to get everybody's tax rate. But the schools in the cities are the only rate that has gone down, and everybody else's has kind of gone up a little bit. And then that red line is the appraised value. But when you look at what we've done with the city tax rate over the last 6 years, it's gone from 0.86349 to 0.606807 this year. And in addition, in that same time period, the council adopted a homestead tax exemption. So if you have a homestead, if you live inside the city, 20% of it, we give a 20% exemption on that too. So what that's done is not only has the tax rate gone down, but the amount of money we have brought in taxes has also gone down. I know that like with the commissioner's race this year, this was kind of like one of the debates, the current commissioner was saying, well, we've lowered the tax rate every year. And the other candidate was saying, but you still make more money in tax, because they did lower the rate, but it was still above the no new revenue rate because appraisals go up. At the city, we've adopted at or below the no new revenue. And this is what that shows, is not only has your rate gone down, we're actually collecting less in taxes. So we're making almost $400,000 less in property tax revenue than we were 6 years ago. Being honest, with inflation and stuff like that, I think we've probably dropped it as much as we can without, really impacting services. So we're still going to be mindful of the property tax rate. And, that's definitely something we look at every year. And, I don't expect it to necessarily go up a lot. That's probably something to come up with. Some of that's driving that property tax decrease is our sales tax. So this is our sales tax revenue in that same time period. So we've gone from collecting $3.1 million in sales tax in 2018 to last year we collected $4.1 million. So almost $1 million more in sales tax revenue during that same period. Now, of course, sales tax immediately responds to inflation because as you pay more for things, you pay more sales tax too. We have to take that into consideration of what the value is. And of course, like last year we had those this year we hope to be a little above that with the turnarounds that kind of started late last year and went into this year. But there are components to your property tax rate. So when you pay sales tax, 6.25% goes to the state of Texas. 1% goes to the city of Borger. 0.5% goes towards property tax reduction. The voters adopted an extra sales tax. The amount of money we make in sales tax actually drives our tax rate down. So the more you spend locally will save you on property tax. So normally I joke, if you're bitching about property taxes, but you buy everything in Amarillo, you're part of the problem. Now, I'm not saying don't buy stuff in Amarillo. We'll talk about what the city does locally, but shopping locally, there's all sorts of studies that say that's better, because a local business will support teams and the money turns over more. From a city standpoint, what I also say with that is if you're not going to buy local, I'd rather you buy it on Amazon than go into Amarillo, because Amazon pays sales tax with where it's delivered. So if you can get it here. If you can't, order it on Amazon and go to Amarillo as last resort. And so because that property tax or that sales tax we generate even on Amazon will help lower your property tax and fund all of your city services. Amazon right now is our number 4 sales taxpayer. It's come up a lot in the last couple of years. And I get it all the time because we're at 60 cents for our property tax rate. Amarillo's at like 42. Everybody's like, well, why can't you have a tax rate like Amarillo? I was like, well, they're able to afford that because you all go spend money over there. I know it's not necessarily one for one, but that is, I like pointing that out. And I like, most online sales are paid at the point of delivery. So online is generally better than going to Amarillo. Now, I'm not saying don't go to Amarillo and have a good night out at a restaurant. But don't go mess with one of their big crowded Walmarts that are dirty and nasty all the time when you can go to Walmart here. If you're going to Amarillo because you like their Walmart better, that's a problem. And we talked a little bit last time about kind of like the state legislature trying to control some things and take over local control. The one thing they haven't messed with, have you ever heard of any of them trying to change sales tax? And they don't, because that's where the state gets most of their money. So they like sales tax, and you never see any bills that are going to restrict the state's portion of sales tax. Their bills have been trying to decide where it's paid, but then again, where it's paid doesn't impact the state's part because the state still gets it. And so anything they do has not impacted that, but it might impact us. And of course, if they want to do away with property and let us increase sales tax, that'd be fine for me as the city because we already make more in sales tax. And an extra half cent on the an extra cent on the sales tax would be twice what I collect in property tax, or what we collect in property tax. But there are other cities like, I'm pretty good friends with the city manager down in Ransom Canyon, kind of a lake community outside of Lubbock. They have no sales tax. It's a bedroom community. They've got like one little store. So like 90% of their revenue is property tax. You take take it away and there's no city. How are you going to pay for those services? That's kind of always that hard sell. Everybody wants less property tax. And I've seen some of the posts, somebody was saying it was an illegal capital gains tax because, I bought my house at $60,000, but yet you increase it every year. But I haven't sold it, so I haven't realized that gain. And I get that, but you're still wanting the services that we provide. So how do we fund that? I mean, how do you just distribute that? We try to be fair in everything we do. And then of course we have another half cent that goes to economic development. And so kind of the other thing I want to talk about when we talk about our tax rate too, real quick, because we get this a little bit, especially when we talk about sports fields. When we decide how we fund, especially youth sports fields and things like that, we've got some stuff that we're trying to come up and do, but people need to understand that we charge no fee for their use. So there is no revenue coming in from any of the youth leagues that use any of our fields. We don't collect money from the school district from the use of the fields. We do not collect money from Frank Phillips College for the use of the fields. But yet they're used by like Tri-City Youth, that's 3 cities, that's everybody in the county. So if we have to take out debt to pay for that, the city's appraised value is $500 million. The county's appraised value is $3 billion. A $5 million debt issuance for the city of Borger is about 7 cents on the tax rate. A $5 million debt issuance for the county is like a half cent on the tax rate. I know people want us to do more and we're trying to do more, but when we have, is it fair for the residents of the city of Borger only to pay for all of that improvement when so many people that don't live in the city use those facilities? And so how do we balance that? And so there's some things there are some things we're gonna do, and we'll talk about this in a little bit when we get to some capital improvement, but we're gonna do some things because there's definitely some things we need to do and they're in our capital plan, but we're probably gonna put some stuff on the ballot just to see if the citizens of Borger want to pay for it, because I'm getting tired of you aren't doing anything, and that way I can at least say, hey, the voters didn't want it, or the voters wanted it. And so just when we talk about sports fields, I just kind of want to throw that out there because there's a lot more to that. And the leagues, they charge you to be a part of the league. They charge you they charge you admission at the gate. We don't get any of that. We pay for the water. We have a full-time employee at Agnes Howell that maintains Agnes Howell. We mow it and most everything we do. And there's no revenue offset. So like Amarillo, like on their next agenda, they've got a new lease agreement coming up with Kids Inc. because Kids Inc. has to pay the city of Amarillo to use all their fields. You have to pay Pampa to use all their fields. You have to pay Lubbock for any of those field uses. In Lubbock, you pay one fee if you're not using the lights. You pay another fee if you use the lights. Lighting, I know, is a big issue right now on some of those fields, but to replace all the new lights with poles is $400,000 per field. And so we're already investing about $100,000 a year in lighting systems and park maintenance, just and all that. So it's coming. I just remember, last week I said you got to give me 3 things to work with me. A, it's the government, so nothing happens fast. B, it's the government, so you're not going to get exactly what you want. But C, it's the government, so something will happen. We're working through some of that, but I just kind of wanted to point that out. And so we do have some purchasing policies, and when we buy things, we can't just necessarily buy it. We do try to buy local when at all possible, but a lot of things do have bid requirements. So if it's $100,000, we have to bid, and we do have to be mindful of what that price is, because as a general rule of thumb, we will buy local as long as it's within 10% of the low bid. So we will give a 10% premium generally to a local vendor over a non-local vendor. And then we can also use purchasing co-ops. These are like Buy Board, HGAC. They pre-bid things so that it meets the bid threshold, and then you can buy them from the pre-bid vendor without having to bid it. So we do try to shop locally. These are the last 6 years of percentage. So over a third of our purchases are local. Last year it was actually back up to 39%. When you see a lower percentage like that, but I want you to keep in mind that some of our biggest expenditures we cannot get locally. So there is not a local supplier of water line. Nobody here sells and makes commercial utility grade water pipe, right? They don't make sewer pipe. There's nowhere here to buy a manhole. There's nowhere here to buy a trash truck. Does anybody know anybody here that manufactures and sells trash trucks? Anybody know where they sell and manufacture fire trucks? And those are some of our bigger items. 30% of almost 40% is still local. So, we are still buying a whole lot local, but at the same point, we do have to be mindful of what that price is. We're not going to y'all wouldn't want us to pay an unreasonable price for just to shop local, because you're still mindful of what we charge for taxes. So we do still have limits on some of that, but we buy more than I think what people forget. And when we talk about personnel, don't forget 67% of the general fund's budget is salaries. So, most of our money goes back into the community in the form of salaries, and then that doesn't tell you what all of our local employees buy, where they spend their money too. So there's a lot of benefit to that. We do also try to work through grant funding. So some of the grants, the projects that we've already had 2 downtown revitalization grants. So that did the new parking lot behind Hip Shots was grant funded. The new sidewalks in the 700 block across from the Morley, where we added the new pedestrian lights there in front of Jalisco's, was grant funded. We actually worked with Panhandle Northern, and we, in partnership with them, got a Chrissy Rail grant, which allowed them to replace all the ballast and cross ties from Borger to Panhandle. FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which completed a master drainage plan. So we've got a master drainage plan. It's probably good or not good and bad. Plan tells us what we need to do, but it tells us I've got $40 million of drainage projects that's at some point I need to try to fund, but going to have to come a little bit of time. And we did get a parks grant for Huber Park. So that $400,000 program, or parks that we put in, half of it was paid for by the Texas Park and Wildlife Department. We have some already approved applications. So we did get a TxDOT Transportation Alternative grant for the Bulldog Loop. So this will build sidewalk and bike trails all around Johnson Park. So it'll connect Cedar Street by McDonald's and go all the way down Bulldog, all the way around the youth center, back around behind the high school, back up around St. John's Road and in front of the Catholic Church, and then all the way back around to West Wilson on that. So we'll get sidewalks and bike paths. So we'll get to we'll mark it out with trails and mile markers, so that will you'll be able to make a complete loop around Johnson Park with the state sidewalks and our sidewalks, so you can stay on the sidewalk and walk completely in a loop. A $5 million grant, it's a 75-25 match, so we have to come up with 25%. However, because of our demographics and our lower household income, we qualify to use federal transportation credits. So the federal government's going to pick up our 25% match, so that project is actually 100% grant funded. So that $5 million isn't going to... We'll have to use some of our reserves because it is reimbursement. So as we make a monthly payment, we'll have to upfront the cash and then we'll get reimbursed. But that's why we keep some of the money we do. I forgot to put up there, we do have another FEMA hazard mitigation grant that we've won. We're currently working in, which will put in fire detection cameras on 3 sides of town. So that's the AI cameras, kind of like what Excel's been using some of that. We have access to some of their cameras, but we're going to control where these go and where we monitor. So our goal is to, with all the other mitigation efforts and everything we do, it will find smoke and give you alerts, hopefully while it's still small and you can get to it before it's so big that somebody calls in. We also have recently applied for a new TDA downtown revitalization grant. This year, though, as a Texas Main Street city, we are only competing against other Main Street cities. They set that aside. So I think there's a pretty good chance we'll get this. Our plan with this one is to redo the 400 block and the 500 block of Main Street. So that'll redo all the sidewalks. We'll reface the planter boxes. We'll get rid of all the black brick. We'll put in pedestrian lighting, so we'll get new street lights and then more pedestrian lighting to really increase pedestrian, repave the streets and do all of that. So we'll at least get 2 blocks of Main Street done, and it's not 100% funded, but our grant, our match on that's $50,000. $50,000 out of $1 million is, that's a pretty good deal. So we also do have some future grants coming up that we're in the process of applying for. We talked a little bit about that Texas Water Development Board for the water well. We've also got, the master drainage plan has allowed us to be able to put in our drainage projects for some of that grant funding, which is the benefit of the drainage plan. So we're hoping to get Stevens Stormwater Project funded eventually through the Texas Water Development Grant Program. Probably in 2 years we'll apply for that when that next cycle opens. So that would put in ground with curb inlet stormwater along Stevens and Hazelwood. So William Street, if you go up, if you get a lot of rain, you just don't go off William Street because it all condenses there. So that'll put in ground, because that's our worst kind of flooding area, but that'll put it all in underground storm and get it off to the creek off by Sterling Street a little quicker. We are required to have an independent audit every year. So every year the auditor comes in and reviews our controls and tells us, audit this year was in, this is what the auditors say. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material specs the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the business type activities, and the discretely presented component units. They call this a clean opinion. What that means is they didn't have to make material changes to our financial statements. So the information you see that means that their audit didn't find any inconsistencies and we didn't put anything anywhere it wasn't supposed to be. So that's the best opinion that you can get in an audit. With the audit, we talked a little bit about awards last week, but we are dedicated to transparency and professionalism in our financial response. So we were this last year for fiscal 25 a GFOA Triple Crown Award winner. That means that our audit, our budget, and our public financial report were all awarded the Distinguished Presentation Award by the GFOA. Means they meet the best standards and are at the top of national requirements. So I think less than 3% of GFOA award winners total get all 3. So we're definitely up there when it comes to financial reporting. borgertx.gov/transparency gets you to where all that stuff is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about budgeting. Joke about this is where all we talked about accounting. Now we're kind of going into budgeting, and then to me, this is where the accounting meets the road, right? There are two just responsibilities. So it's my job to prepare a proposed budget, and it's the council's job to approve it. So they set the direction and the priorities of the budget, and then I try to put it together, and then they still have to pass it. So what I put together, they can say, nope. Generally, we work through work sessions, and we'll get to the time period about that. I know what they want well before, so I'm not going to present something that they don't support. And there again, we have had the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the last 5 years, actually 6 years now. And so our budget is online, borgertx.gov/budget. That document's got all sorts of information. I mean, for each department, it shows you what's in, there's their goals and accomplishments and pictures and graphs, and you can go, you get on there and you look around the website some, I can tell you we're not hiding anything. Like I said last week, we might not be able to spoon feed you, but it's all out there. So our total budget this year is just over $41 million amongst all funds. That's 24 active funds, each serving a distinct purpose. It included $6.4 million in capital investment into the community this current year. And of that, $1.9 million was dedicated to a replacement of operating equipment. So that's trash truck, if it ever gets here, ambulance, if it ever gets here. But we've gotten all of our light duty vehicles this year. We do try to replace somewhere around $1.5 million to $2 million in equipment every year. I'll tell you why here shortly. And then in fiscal 26, the budget totaled 198 full-time positions working through one of 27 departments. So we are authorized for, actually it's 199 now since we added the media specialist last year. So this is our budget process. We start in January and it ends in September. So 9 months out of the year, the budget is one of my bigger responsibilities. So in January, we start capital requests. So the budgets have to, the departments have to go through and figure out what they want. And I always try to, so like this year, the budget's gonna be unique this year. So they asked for over $4 million in capital equipment this year. We're gonna be able to fund about $1.2 million of that. We do this in a 5-year increment, but the funny thing is they wanted $4.8 million of stuff this year, but in 2031, they only wanted $900,000 worth of stuff. So every director always wants the stuff right now, right? And so my job is to kind of prioritize that and spread it out because, we're over budget this year, but in 2031, we're projected to be, almost $1.1 million less than what we normally spend. So we've got room over there. So it's what can we take and what are necessities and what aren't. Then in March, we update goals, objectives, and performance measures. In April, we open up the operating budget requests. So that these are where they adjust, utilities and tools and equipment and all the light stuff. So they've just completed that. And so now my job between now and June and really July is we'll work through that. I'll present where we're at with the council. We're going over personnel this coming work session because we are trying to get some cost of living adjustments into the budget and see where our priorities are. That normally culminates with a basically finished budget by July. But keep in mind that July 29th is when the appraisal district, that's when they provide us the final appraised value. So I can't calculate a final tax rate and I can't know what our final tax revenue is until July 29th. We have estimates and we work around that. So a lot of times I try to build it where it's not that big of a deal. Luckily, I still have 2 months. If you work for a school, their fiscal year starts September 1. My fiscal year starts October 1. So that July deadline's a little bigger of an issue if you work for a school district, but most other local governments are at least October 1. So we start in August with our proposed tax rate and go through the whole process of putting all that out in public hearings and going through that process. And then everything gets finally adopted in September for the fiscal year start October 1. So from January to September, we're trying to figure out how and what we're going to fund and how much money we've got. 13% of the general fund revenue is paid for by your property tax. Your property tax only funds 13%. Sales tax is 20%. Our industrial district contracts is 24%. So that's what all the industry pays us to stay outside of the city limits. Service charges are 36%. We'll go in more detail on that in a minute. So 36% are paid by the people actually using the service. License and permits, 1%. Fines and forfeitures, just 1%. Franchise tax is 5%. So that's what the electric company, the utility, like the gas company, they pay us to use our right-of-ways. The power line's in your alley, right? And they put their pole in our alley. That's the city's right-of-way. They have to pay us to use that. So we get a little bit of money from the gas company and the electric company and the phone company and all of that for use of our right-of-way. Of course, they tear it up too, so they definitely generate some cost. And if you're the gas company right now, you're trying to replace everything all at once, so you've got holes all over town if you're the gas company, which is not us. Trust me, I'm as frustrated with that as you are. But so when we talk about those services, what those consist of is 32% is solid waste. So you pay to have your solid waste, and people pay when they dump it off at the transfer station. EMS revenue is 21%, so you get a bill from the ambulance service. 21% is their revenue. Dispatch services is 5%. So Fritch, Stinnett, and Hutchinson County pay us for dispatch services. We are the public safety and answering point for all of the county. So every 911 call comes into the city of Borger, and they pay us to dispatch those calls. You'll get a lot more of that in a couple of weeks when we have OEM and dispatch. BISD, they pay us for the school resource officers. They pay 75% of the cost. We pick up 25%. So that's 6 SROs right now. So that's about 6%. That's I think worked out pretty well. We've been really lucky. Our SROs have been pretty stable now for quite a while, and a lot different than a lot of other communities. And I think right now we've got them all kind of spread out where they're a really good fit, other than, having to deal with Terry Don, that's just. But in my career with the city, I think, last probably 4 or 5 years, we've had really good. That's worked out really well. So, and it makes sense. Most when school districts start their own ISD police departments, a lot of times that's not the best. If there is an active shooter or something like that, it's the Borger Police Department that's going to be there. So having Borger police officers in the school, makes that a lot easier, and we train together and do all of that stuff. We've got communication, so that works out really well. Contract fire services, that's 8%. The county pays us a little bit to respond to fires in the county, but a lot of that is when we go help others at the state, or our mitigation services. So like when we do controlled burns around the complex pays us to provide those controlled burn services to mitigate their land. So right now we're offsetting, actually with this last bill we went out, all of our contract fire services this year, we're at about, I think, $569,000. Right now, with half the year left, we'll get a little more than that. Our budget was for $550,000, and our total mitigation cost is about $650,000. So we're offsetting about 85% of our mitigation costs with revenue from outside the community. So that's kind of another thing that our taxpayers aren't having to pay, but they get a big benefit from. And then other charges, miscellaneous, is 10%. So those are like birth certificate fees, admission to the youth center, concessions at the youth center, building permits, all of that together adds up to just 10%. And then 8% is that industrial district. 18% is the water sewer. They pay us. They pay the general fund to offset some of those services. Because remember, if the water sewer was provided by a private utility, they'd be paying us franchise fees and they'd be paying us property tax, right? So we calculate kind of what the water services, based on their water sales, what we'd get in their franchise fees and what their assets would pay in property tax if it was a private utility. So that offsets some of our costs. And then the general fund, because they provide services, we provide services to them, right? So I'm like the city manager of the whole city, right? My salary's in the general fund, but I still oversee water sewer. HR is in the general fund, but it's the same HR department that handles all of their employees. So that's some of that money coming back to offset those services. And so where does it go? 64% goes to public safety, police, fire, EMS, code enforcement. 17% goes to public works, streets, solid waste. 10% is general admission, and 9% is recreation, which is parks and recreation. In the general fund, 67% are people. In the water sewer fund, it's 27%. But remember, we talked about that in the water sewer fund, that they are selling a product. We're selling water, right? There is a cost to producing water. So we've got a lot more cost on the water sewer that we don't have in the general fund. All of our services in the general fund are pretty much their services provided by people, so we have to have people to provide them. So in this current fiscal year, total salary and benefits are $18,695,000, with a good chunk of that, staying in our community with the people that live around here. Talk a little bit about the water sewer fund. So we have $14 million in total revenue. $2.85 million of that comes from our general water sales. That's for residential and commercial customers. $2.33 million come from the sewer charges. $4.15 million is water sales to Phillips 66. $2.5 million water sales to Nutrien. $896 water sales to Tokai. $745 Orion water sales, and then $532 are miscellaneous revenue. 89% of our water is sold to industrial customers, with the residential and commercial use 11%. We sell about 12 million gallons of water a day, so less than 2 million goes to the residences. But because of that, our system is more robust. We talked about this a little bit last week about when was the last time you've seen a boil water notice in Borger. And because of that, in our terrain, so we actually elevate about 10 million gallons of water. So we've got the 3 water towers, but because of the terrain, the ground storage tanks at the water treatment plant are technically elevated because South Florida is on a hill, right? So if we ever lose water and we shut off the industry, we have about 10 days of water stored before we would lose water without power. So probably, I can't remember the last time the powers went out that we also ran out of water. Might be upset at the gas company or the electric company, but you probably still had water through all that. Talk a little about our debt. So there are a couple types of debt. General obligations. These are the debt that the voters approve, right? So these things go on the ballot, generally for parks. Then we have certificate of obligations. The council can authorize COs without voters, but then we're bound, we have to pay from it from existing sources or within the amount of tax revenue they can raise without hitting the voter approval rate. So normally we use certificates of obligation for things that we have to buy. You know, like a fire truck, we have to buy. You know, do we want the voters to say we don't care about your fire truck, you know, you can't buy it? I mean, we need it. And so, but for the most part, certificate of obligations, we manage our tax rate, and what we do is when one debt pays off, we issue more debt so that we can use the same amount of tax revenue to pay for the next debt issuance. We're going to probably do a little bit more with that, and the council at their work session next week is going to get a big dose of how we're looking at some of the debt projects we got coming up. Revenue bonds, these are bonds that are backed by revenue. So this is like, we can issue a revenue bond in the water sewer department and pledge the water sewer revenue for that. They are not backed by property tax, but because of that, they generally have a higher interest rate. So if you back it by tax, you get a lower interest rate because it's the full faith of the government, right? And so our tax-backed revenue, or tax-backed debt right now is around 3% on average. So, and then we talked a little bit about tax anticipation notes. So these are short-term notes that can be backed by the taxes. So like when we redid City Hall this last year, the plan was to do it over a couple of years and do it a section at a time. When I did the full analysis, it was cheaper to take out a 5-year short-term tax note to do it all at once, because then you're not mobilizing the contractor every year. And actually, we issued that at 3%, and we were making almost 5% in the bank. So while it was sitting in the bank while we were working on it, it made a little money. So when we did the full analysis, it was actually about $60,000 cheaper to go ahead and issue a 5-year tax note than it would have been to budget $350,000 every year for 5 years by the time you consider inflation on the price. So we did do one of those and do it all at once to save a little bit of money. But there again, we did that within our means. You saw the tax rate go down. Those were things that we needed, but we didn't pass it on to the taxpayer. So bond companies rate your debt, you know, and this is how we get a credit rating. So we don't get like a 0 to 850 or 900 or whatever, you know, your credit score is. We get rated by grades. And so a D means you're in payment default. C is currently highly vulnerable. They're probably afraid you're going to default. Double C is still highly vulnerable, but not current highly vulnerable. Triple C is currently vulnerable, but not highly vulnerable. You're just vulnerable. B is more vulnerable, but not currently vulnerable. BB is less vulnerable, and then triple B is adequate. A, and now keep in mind that A's, you have pluses and minuses on either of these two. So you can have single A minus, single A plus, double A minus, double A plus, and then triple A is just triple A. So A are strong but susceptible, which means they're in good financial condition, but something could happen. And so like an A plus is Levelland, Plainview is an A plus, Dumas is an A minus. Double A is Borger and Pampas, so we're both double A minus. Amarillo is triple A. Extremely strong. So we're very strong and not susceptible, and then Amarillo's extremely strong. That's because they've got all that growth. So, you know, they get more tax every year, and so it's really hard to get that AAA. What came through our last rating, these were some of the comments from what the rating said, is the outlook is stable. The city has evaluated exposure to drought and wildfire risk. Management has adopted a proactive and aggressive fire mitigation program, which we view as somewhat offsetting the risk. So that was some of the vulnerability. They factor in your risk to, you know, to natural disaster. So we get some points for all that stuff we're doing on wildfire mitigation. And of course, that picture back behind there is the 7 Mile burn that stopped the fire 2 years ago. So, I mean, we definitely have proof that the mitigation efforts are providing value to the city. The city's total tax rate is well below the maximum of at 65.66. The maximum in the state of Texas is $1.50, with 15.63 cents allocated for debt service. The rating reflects the city's healthy reserve balance, balanced operations, sound management, and the strength of the institutional framework. So our policies and procedures, how we do things, how we send money is contributing to our strong credit rating. Although we continue to view the city's long-term trend of population decline as a source of credit pressure, we note the ongoing development of 85 residential lots as a positive shift. So buying that land and encouraging those developers is helping our credit rating. which is helping lower costs for us to do the things that we're doing. So when we say housing is important, I hounded on that last week. I'm going to continue hounding on that a lot through it because it's important and people are noticing. We were actually downgraded to to an A plus from a double A minus because of the population decline, because all the double A minus cities in Texas were showing strong growth, and it didn't matter that we had good funds and our finances were strong. They took us down and put us on watch for 2 years because of that. And so by all of this, when we did the last step, we actually got upgraded back to the double A minus because we are seeing the investment in housing. Double A minus is better than A plus. So we were still strong at A plus, but it's always one ways I get a pat on the back is when we get a credit rate increase because that justifies, that we're doing financial management really well. Comprehensive financial management practices highlighted by detailed budgeting planning based on a realistic assumption and with robust monitoring, a rolling 5-year capital improvement plan that is updated annually, a localized investment policy with quarterly reporting to the City Council, and a formal reserve policy to maintain 28% of expenditures in fund balance contributed to our strong rating. Manageable debt burden with some additional debt plans that we do not expect will materially affect the city's overall debt and liability profile and no significant budgetary pressures from pensions. Our TMRS is well funded. And pretty much what this is saying is they know we're going to issue some more debt because I told them likely we're going to have some debt coming up. Being debt-free doesn't get you a whole lot because there are certain things, there are projects that are just big enough that we're never going to be able to cash fund, right? Now, it's about managing your debt. And of course, your credit rating goes into how you manage your debt. And I'm not saying we take out as much debt as possible. It's about being smart and managing it. You actually lose points if you don't have debt because the rating agencies view no debt as you deferring investment in capital assets. And if you're deferring necessary investment, it's all going to blow up at once or, fail at once. And they see that as a bigger risk than actually having some debt. And so this, I joke, sometimes people say, well, we need more money. We've got to have that rainy day fund. We need lots of money in the rainy day fund for when it rains. And my counter to that normally is like, well, you don't have to worry about the rain so much if you got a good roof. And so it's a balancing act, and we try to do that pretty well. And this is Standard & Poor's, this is their evaluation. So this is a third party, company that's all they do. And these are their words. These are not my words. These are not somebody's words that I paid to give us these words. These are independent that serve the bond companies. So right now, total debt in the city is little over $41 million. Of that, the general fund is $16 million and the water sewer fund is $24 million. So in the water sewer fund, most of that was tied to the Northwest Wellfield expansion. That is what allowed Nutrien to do the Lone Star project, which was their $1 billion project. So the city of Borger took out $38 million to expand the wellfield and put in a new water line that allowed a $1 billion investment in our community. So I think that's a pretty good trade-off, and that's paid from their water sales and not on your taxes. Current outstanding debt in the general fund is tied to the dome. So that was about $10 million of that. And then we're still paying on some of the renovations to the fire station and the police station a couple years back and the municipal building. But we've got most of our facilities in pretty good shape. So our annual debt payments represent about $5 million total. 61% of that's paid out of the water sewer fund. Property taxes pay for 17% of that. Crimwall debt is 13%. So that's the Canadian River Municipal Water Authority. We're a member of them, so their debt we pay a portion of as well. That's out of the water sewer fund. Tourism fund pays 6%, venue fund pays 2% of that, and the transportation user fund pays 1% of that. So there again, out of that $41 million of debt, your property taxes are only paying 17% of that. We are mindful of what goes onto the property tax rate. And of those payments every year, $3.2 million are going toward principal with $1.8 going towards interest. So we're paying off a little over $3 million every year. BorgerTX.gov/budget. This will pop up the little budget book in a minute. So that's what it looks like if you go to that page. You've got table of contents. You can go through and explore the budget all you want if you'd like. Talk a little bit about our community investment program. So sometimes this is called a capital improvement plan. I like calling it a community investment program because everything we spend is investing in our community, right? So park improvements, street improvements, service improvements. So if you go to BorgerTX.gov/transparency, you can click on our project, and this is a link to all of our current projects. You can kind of see it's got a map there, and you can get details on everything we've got planned and how it's coming. We talked about this a little bit. Right now, we've got $6.4 billion in this current budget. Over the next 5 years, we have identified $59.1 million in projects. Not all of that is funded, and not all of it will get funded. But we try to identify every project that we need so that as we get funding or as grant opportunities come open or donations, that we've got an idea of what we need. So you can't fully adequately manage your community's needs and prioritize unless you know what all those needs are. These are some of the more recent projects we already talked about. There's 10th Street, the new fire ladder truck. You'll see how that saves you money when we get to the fire section. That's that pass-through park we put down in the 400 block next to Hip Shots that connects the new parking lot to the front of Main Street. You've got the swimming pool under construction up there, and then there's us cutting the ribbon on Huber Park. Some of the things we've got under planning right now, the West 3rd Street stormwater. So if you go out to the animal shelter, you know the road's kind of crumbling going out that way. So that's coming up. We've been waiting on a grant to try to fund some of that, and we didn't get it, so we're going to fund it all. But we've been moved to a secondary stage. We still might get some, but we waited a little bit to do that because we were trying to get the grant funding. I think that was worth it, but that's coming up. So that will redo that entire road and the new concrete and the drainage thing under it. But that's about $1.7 million. We are pretty much going to move forward with a new fire substation out in Buena Vista now. Since we've added EMS, we're really getting to capacity in the current central fire station. There's some other things that are likely about to start happening out of Buena Vista that I can't tell you yet that's kind of supporting some of that too. Across from Nutrien in the Enterprise Park. So, you know, we've always kind of had a need out in Buena Vista. So if you look at you get credit for your ISO, you're supposed to be within 2.5 miles of the first out engine and within 5 miles of the first out ladder. So the 5 miles from the first out ladder covers the whole city, but the 2.5 miles from the first out engine does not cover all the city. So it covers a good chunk of it, but you start getting a little deeper down there in Broadmoor, it doesn't. This will close that gap. It'll also give us more space to house the ambulances since we're doing all of that and give some more sleeping quarters for that too. With that, we're also gonna probably put in a fire training tower at that location to increase our training. Fire department, they do contract work for, they do safety standbys out at the plant or at Nutrien. When they do that, we make money. That money goes into the fire training fund that was on that list. We're gonna be able to use some of that money to put the fire tower in when we do the fire substation. We're looking at issuing debt next fiscal year, which then by the time you get designs and all of that stuff, it's still going to probably break ground maybe in 3 years with operation within 5 years of that timing. We're also going to work on a new animal shelter with this next debt issuance. Kind of the good thing there is so the sewer plant needs a new office building. The office out of the sewer plant, the office and lab was built with the plant in 1957. So it's kind of reached the end of its life. The animal shelter location is a really good place for them to have a new office right there at the front of the wastewater plant. So we're gonna, because of that, I can use a little bit of that water sewer money to help pay for a new animal shelter. We're working right now to get the county lot that's just right over here by the radio tower, back behind City Hall. So the county juvenile used to have their little garden right there. I think our goal is we're going to try to stick it there. That'll give it more visibility. You know, we can have like a little video board out there so we can put the little cute pictures of the animals that are available for adoption. And yeah, and I think having more view of it, I think will be a lot better. And this way, our plan is to kind of separate it. We'll talk some when Daryl and them are here next year. So we'll have like the working side of it kind of separate from the public viewing adoption side of it. So you won't quite have the smell issues and the noise issues that you kind of have now. So generally, we've got a lot of support for that. You know, price has gone up. We're looking at about $2.5 million for that. Just a metal building with some improvement there, but that's likely coming. And then we are working through what sports fields improvements we need. So this is what we're going to do on our own. You're probably going to see two things. You're going to see some debt that we're going to issue to level some fields, to improve irrigation systems, to do some ADA accessibility, some of the main fencing and usability, probably new dugouts and things like that. Then you're probably going to see a bond like go to the voters for some of the other things that we consider like new lighting. The things that would be nice but aren't necessarily needed. So what we need the community feedback from. And we're still going to talk. Some of that might switch. I'm going to talk with the school district and the college, depending on what their needs are. If they've got some money to get, like, I don't mind taking out the debt if I can get an agreement with them for an annual contribution to offset some of that debt. But like some of the things we price quoted were new grandstands at the Huber Park baseball field. But from a rec standpoint, I don't need new grandstands. That's not necessarily going to benefit recreation leagues. That would benefit the high school baseball team. So if the high school baseball team wants to continue to use that field, then we need to see if they want to take some of that. If their goal is still to eventually build something someplace else, same thing there. And then the college, kind of the same thing. They're looking at maybe building something if they want to use. And when we talk about that, like we get a little pushback because the school teams and the college teams, they want complete access. They want to control it and nobody else use it. which that's fine if you're giving me some money. We can work out some times when it's, restricted for you and then when public times are. But if you're not giving me money, how can I justify telling the public they can't use the field that their public money is supporting? Yes, I get that the parents might help maintain and do all of that stuff, but we're still got the employee, we're still paying for the water, and it's still a public field. You can't lock it and keep the public out of it without some sort of agreement with some sort of monetary compensation. There are some coordinations going on with that, and I think, that might change how much we can do and what we do, because that's the same thing with like lighting at Huber Park. That's $400,000 to light that baseball field, and I don't know that benefits rec leagues a whole lot when I need some of that money. Like some of the fields out at Agnes Howe, I can just replace the light heads and not spend, $75,000 would replace probably a third of the light heads at Agnes Howe. But if I put lights at Huber Park, that's going to take up all of that money. And so those are just some of the things coming. So you're going to see some of that working through with debt issuance in the coming. So I like to go through a couple of rumors and some things that I hear, so that I call this the fish was this big. And so the one thing I always get is, why does the city have so many new vehicles? And we talked about investing in $1.9 million in rolling stock and equipment. In the last 5 years, since 2016, our average maintenance costs have gone down by 37%, or $252,000 every year. So this is where I talk about cheap isn't always cheap. And so when we make a financial decision, we're trying to look at the whole picture. A lot of people, they see a $50,000 brand new truck, but they're not seeing the maintenance and the long-term operating cost of that truck. And so by increasing our equipment, we've saved $252,000 in maintenance costs. That 1 cent on our tax rate is about $40,000. So this right here, of that 86 to 60 cents, those newer vehicles, is 10 cents of that tax reduction. Seeing new vehicles is not necessarily bad, and they're not, we're buying work package trucks. It's not like they're anything super, yes, they're nice because they're new, but they're not anything. When we were buying used, we were trying to get the best we could, and half of them were somewhat nicer because they'd go find a better package. Now we've got all new, but they're all just work packages. So that's definitely been a big plus. The other one I get a whole lot is, why does the policeman aren't use those expensive Tahoes? Right now, a Tahoe is $58,000, a little over $58,000. A Ford Explorer is $55,000. It's only $3,000 cheaper. In 6 years, when we go to sell it, a Tahoe's bringing $15,000. That same Explorer is bringing $6,500. So at the end of the day, our total cost in that Tahoe is $43,200, and our total cost in that Explorer is $58,800 or $48,800. So that Tahoe is cheaper. Mainly because everybody wants a Tahoe, so when we sell them, there's a bigger demand and they pay more for them. So that Tahoe is worth a whole lot. They're also pretty resilient. You will notice that we've put the SROs in some Chargers because they're cheaper, and Chargers are not good patrol cars for regular patrol, because the officers will beat the crap out of them. They just don't hold up. But for SROs that have a car assigned to them and they're the only one in it, and they're not, when you arrest people do. I have seen all sorts of stuff happen in the back of a squad car, and the Chargers and stuff, they just don't hold up like that. So at the end of 4 years, they're already falling apart, to where we do get longer longevity out of the Tahoes, and then we get the higher value, because you get a Charger right now for about $38,000, but when we sell those, they're bringing like $1,500. So it's still a little cheaper, but you're also selling them more often, and they have some issues. So that's the deal with the Tahoes. There again, borger.gov/transparency, or just borger.gov. You click on transparency. You can see bi-monthly financial reports. You can see the expense reports if you want to see on every little thing that we buy for the first half of the month and the last half of the month. They're all listed there. The audits are there. The budget's there. All sorts of information. It's not hidden. Questions? So I know finances aren't the most exciting. Next week you'll get to talk about drones and animal control equipment and, all sorts of other police technology. And I'm sure that's probably a little more fun than finances. But I think, this is really important to understand. Now in the coming weeks, you're going to see what all your money gets you. Now you've kind of seen, where the money comes from. Hopefully you feel a little better about, we're not trying to screw you over, and we're not over collecting, and we are trying to be somewhat mindful with where your money goes. I will say, if you ever got any questions, ask. There's generally probably a logical reason. There are people that spend so much time trying to dream up conspiracies. I don't know how they ever get any sleep. I'm like, what the hell? How do you have that much time I don't have enough time to freaking conspire with anybody to do anything anyway. Because if I was doing that, I wouldn't get anything done. But, I think every employee wants to do the right thing, and they will, if you ask them, they'd a lot rather answer a question than have you assume. I just think people like to assume, and then some people just like to gossip. And so it's funner to gossip. And I joke The only people that gossip more than hairdressers are roughnecks, and between roughnecks and hairdressers, that's about 80% of this town. So, this town is built on gossip. It has always been built on gossip, and it is going to stay on gossip. So I try not to let gossip bother me too much. As we've been more transparent and you see like programs like this, and as we start putting this out on Facebook and some things like that where people can get it, and you see the meetings on Facebook and you see our engagement on Facebook, there's a lot less of that conspiracy. And like now we don't have to really correct as much as we do because other people will correct for us because they've seen it. And I see that a whole lot. Like, I can't believe they're doing this. Why are they doing that? And then some people are like, well, didn't you watch the meeting that was on here last week? They told you what they were doing. So next week we'll be back here, animal control and the police department. Like I said, I'll have some new free swag to bribe you to come back. My goal is they feel a little better when they leave here anyway about how everything's are going. But that's all I have for tonight.